Drums echoed across the valley, a steady, joyful rhythm that shook even the leaves on the mango trees. It was a wedding day in Kasenga, and not just any wedding. Mwida, the most admired young farmer in the region, was marrying Amani, a woman whose quiet strength and kindness had touched many hearts. The air was thick with roasted goat, Mariela wine, and the sweet perfume of ripe guavas the village girls had braided into her crown. Her dress wasn't the fanciest, just a carefully woven kitenge with golden stitching on the sleeves, but her smile made her glow brighter than the morning sun. Amani stood next to Mwida with hands folded in front of her, her bare feet dusted from dancing. Her heart beat fast, not from nerves but from love. This was her beginning. She believed in him. She had seen the boy under the pride, the man who stayed up late to dig trenches during droughts, the one who once rescued a goat stuck in the thorns without waiting for applause. He had told her just a week before, "You will not just be my wife, Amani. You will be my sunrise." The ceremony moved on with songs, ululations, and elder blessings. Women threw millet and maize kernels at the couple, shouting words of fertility and good fortune. As the village chief raised their joined hands and declared them husband and wife, the crowd erupted. Children clapped wildly. Old women wiped tears. Amani's father, sitting quietly under a neem tree, let a single tear trail down his cheek. He had raised her after her mother died, always reminding her, "Be like the river. Soft, but it shapes even stone." But not all hearts clapped out of joy. Mwida's mother, Mama Darika, watched from the second row with pursed lips. Her son had made his choice, yes, but not with her blessing. Amani, in her eyes, was too quiet, too thin. Lips and laughter, she had scoffed to her neighbor earlier. That's what he's chasing. Not womb and wisdom. She had tried to arrange a union with the butcher's daughter, thick-hipped, loud-laughed, already raising 3 younger siblings. A woman made for bearing. Amani was a dreamer. Dreams don't cook. Dreams don't give heirs. Later that afternoon, under the baobab where the reception was held, a group of Mwida's friends clustered around him with gourd mugs full of local brew. They slapped his back, laughing. "You finally did it, eh?" Kato said, grinning. "Married the most beautiful girl in Kasenga." Mwida smiled, pride glowing in his eyes. "She's soft like banana cake," he said, taking a sip. "But will she give you sons?" someone joked. "Or just sweet words and long sighs?" The laughter that followed was loud and careless. Mwida chuckled, not defending her, not even flinching. "Well, if she doesn't," he said with a wink, "I can always get another. I'm not old yet." Amani, standing a few feet away, heard them. The words didn't hit like rocks. They landed like sand, coarse and hard to swallow, but not loud enough to scream about. She turned her head and kept smiling. She handed more plates to the women serving food, fixed a crying child's wrapper, and made sure Mwida's uncles had water. Inside, a part of her folded like damp cloth. As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the red earth, the drumming faded into softer humming. Women sat in circles, telling stories from their own weddings. Children ran barefoot, chasing each other with banana stems turned into toy spears. Amani took a moment behind the hut to breathe alone. She placed her palm over her belly, a quiet wish swelling in her chest. She had always wanted a big family. Not just for him. For herself. A home filled with laughter, arguments over who touched the porridge pot, tiny hands reaching up at sunset. When Mwida found her, she was staring at the horizon, humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing. He slipped an arm around her waist. "You've made me proud today," he whispered. She leaned against him. "We're just getting started." He didn't respond, only pressed a dry kiss to her temple, his eyes already scanning where his friends still sat, waving him over. The village was still buzzing when the stars took over the sky. But already, behind the warmth and cheer, whispers stirred like wind through dried maize. Some came from older women seated on straw mats, arms crossed. Others from men who watched too closely. "She's beautiful," one said, "but thin like cassava leaves after harvest." "No child yet?" another asked. "How old is she again?" 25, I think. Almost 26. My cousin's wife had her third by that age." "Maybe she's one of those types," someone murmured. "You know, barren. Pretty but barren." The words weren't cruel in their tone, but in their repetition. They would echo in the weeks ahead, passed around like spoons at the morning porridge pot. But for now, Amani danced once more under the moonlight, her laughter blending with the village's music. Her eyes found Mwida across the fire. She lifted her hand and waved. He smiled, waved back, but as he turned, he muttered something to a friend standing beside him. The friend laughed again, slapped his back. That night, as they lay on their new woven mat, the fire outside crackling low, Amani whispered, "Did you mean what you said? That I'm your sunrise?" Muida was half asleep, facing the wall. Never mind," she said gently. She curled into herself and listened to the crickets. In the morning the ash would still be warm. But a different kind of cold would begin to settle. Not a storm, not yet. Just a breeze of something unsaid. Something that would grow if not named. 5 years had passed since the drums of Amani's wedding echoed through the valley. The laughter, the dancing, the blessings, they were all now fragments of a memory that clung to her like dust that wouldn't wash off. The compound had changed. The mango tree stood taller. The goats had multiplied. But Amani's womb remained silent. At first people were gentle, hopeful even. "It takes time," they told her. "Rain doesn't fall the same day you plant." She had believed them. She counted the days, then the months. She tracked her cycle with marks on the mud wall, each one circled with quiet anticipation. Each one a prayer. And each month the red disappointment returned. She didn't give up. She went to the old herbalist by the riverside who gave her roots soaked in bitter oil and told her to sleep facing east. She drank concoctions that twisted her stomach and sent her crawling to the latrine. She lay flat with hot stones on her back. Nothing worked. Some nights she curled herself into a ball and whispered, "Please?" Not to Muida. Not to any god in particular. Just to the silence. Muida began to change. Not suddenly, not with anger, but with distance. It started with him coming home later. Then it became excuses for not eating her food. Then came the sleeping apart. He began to stay out past dark, saying he had to meet with elders or inspect land. But the scent of local brew and someone else's perfume often clung to his clothes. Amani never asked. She folded his shirts, made his porridge, kept sweeping the courtyard. Once, when she gently mentioned visiting a clinic in the town across the hill, he waved her off. "Why should I follow a woman to some doctor? What if the problem is you?" She had nodded. Not in agreement, but in resignation. That night, she soaked in warm water and bit her lip to hold back tears. The water rippled and so did her spirit. The village, once polite in their waiting, had begun to murmur openly. At the well, women no longer shielded their stares. "She still hasn't conceived? Maybe it's punishment. Sometimes families carry things." Her smile's still the same though. Even when there's no child crying behind her. Maybe she's cursed. Children began to call her Mama Wote, a strange nickname that sounded kind but carried a bite. Mother of none, mother of all. Even when she helped tie a baby's cloth or soothe the child's fever, the mothers would half smile, half pity. "She's good with children," they'd whisper. Too bad. Muida's cruelty was not in fists or shouts. It was in his laughter. One market day he stood with other men by the sugarcane stand, chewing lazily and talking too loud. Amani, returning from buying cassava, heard him say, "What's a wife without children? A house with no roof. Might look good outside, but what's it keeping warm?" The men burst out laughing. Amani didn't pause. She didn't cry. She kept walking until she reached home, her legs trembling. She placed the cassava on the table and sat on the edge of the bed. Her breath was shallow, as if someone had reached into her chest and wrung it. The walls of the room seemed to close in. It wasn't anger she felt, it was something deeper. A collapse, like the center of her had fallen inward. That night, when Muida returned, he didn't notice the change. She served him food, listened to his idle complaints, and cleared the dishes like always. He fell asleep easily. She stayed awake. In the small wooden box at the foot of their bed, hidden under a folded kitenge, were 3 tiny shirts she had stitched in their first year of marriage. One blue, one yellow, and one with small cowrie shells she had sewn with trembling hands. Each represented a hope, a child who never came. She took them out gently, unfolded them and placed them on the floor. She stared for a long time, running her fingers across the stitching, whispering each name she had imagined. Then she walked outside, lit the small clay pot used for cooking and fed the cloth to the fire. The flames were hungry, cruel. They didn't hesitate. Smoke rose into the night, curling up into the dark sky, unseen by anyone. She stood there watching, until nothing remained but ash and the faint smell of burnt cotton. The next morning she swept the ashes into the wind and made porridge. Muida sat at the table, yawning. "Did you hear that dog barking last night?" he mumbled. "No," she said softly, "I didn't hear anything." And she hadn't. Not the dog. Not a child. Not even her own voice. The dry season had settled in with a lazy finality. Even the goats didn't bother chasing chickens anymore, and the village air hung heavy with dust and silence. Amani spent her days like clockwork, sweeping the courtyard, boiling bitter roots she no longer believed in, and fixing Muida's food before he returned from wherever he now found reasons to disappear. The wind carried less laughter these days. What it carried instead were echoes, of questions she dared not answer, of dreams that had become shadows in her own eyes. One morning, as she bent near the well filling a clay pot, a new voice rose behind her, not harsh like the others, not questioning but gentle and firm. "You carry that pot like you've carried the whole village." Amani turned to see a woman she did not know. Her head wrap was clean, her back straight despite her age. She wore no rings, no husband's name in her tone. The villagers had been murmuring about her already. A widowed teacher named Rahima who had come from the southern province to stay with her cousin after her husband's death. "I'm Rahima," she said, reaching out a hand. "And I've been watching you." Amani didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened around the pot. "You do everything well. Too well. Do you ever do anything for yourself?" Amani lowered her eyes. "I have a home to care for. A husband." Rahima nodded slowly. "Yes. But what else?" They didn't speak more that morning, but the seed had been planted. Later that week, Rahima came to the house, bold enough to knock while Muida was out at the field. She brought maize flour, 2 fish wrapped in banana leaves, and a small book tied with thread. "I'm starting a small literacy circle," she said, "for the village girls. Some can't even write their names. I'm too old to chase them alone. I need someone like you. Someone they'll listen to." Amani hesitated. Her hands wanted to reach out. Her heart dared to lean forward. But her mouth said, "Muida won't allow it." Rahima didn't argue. She just placed the book in Amani's hands, resting her palm on top of it for a moment. "Plant where you are wanted," she whispered. "And what grows there will feed someone." That evening, Amani read the first chapter. It was about a woman in a distant land who built a school out of mud and mango bark. She read it under the dim oil lamp, her eyes moving slowly, her heart catching on certain sentences as if they had been written in her name. When Muida returned that night, drunk and tired, he noticed the book on the table. "What's this?" he asked, flipping through it with a sneer. "Storybooks now?" "It's from Rahima," she said carefully. "She wants me to help teach the girls." He laughed, a short dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Teach them what?" "How to cook barren dreams." She didn't respond. He leaned back against the chair. "Your job is to keep trying. Not running off to play with chalk and fools." Amani stared at the clay pot simmering on the fire. Her hand was steady, but her chest was thundering. She didn't argue. Didn't beg. Just served his food and watched the silence settle between them like a fog. That night, after he snored into sleep, she stepped outside. The moon was high, full, indifferent. Her bare feet touched the ground softly as she walked to the mango tree. She remembered the wedding day, the dancing, the laughter, the promises. All of it had begun here. And maybe it had ended here too. She opened the book again, letting the pages flutter in the wind until it stopped on the final line of a story. She walked away not to escape, but to begin again. Amani sat under the tree until the moon had moved. She didn't cry. Her tears had dried over the years. What was left now was decision, quiet, small but unshakable. By morning her bag was packed. Not with much. A spare kaitanj, a wooden comb, the book from Rahima, and 3 empty pieces of cloth, just large enough to swaddle a baby or maybe one day a purpose. She didn't leave a note. She didn't make noise. The rooster crowed. Muida stirred inside. Amani walked. And the wind, for once, did not carry whispers. It carried her. The sky was still holding its breath when Amani folded her wrapper over her shoulders and tied the laces of her sandals. Dawn hadn't yet stretched across Kasenga, and the chickens were only beginning to stir. The village was asleep, but inside Amani's chest, something had already awakened and could no longer be caged. She moved gently around the hut, folding a few clothes and placing them into her small reed bag. She didn't touch the cooking pot, didn't fetch water. The firewood stack was low, but she left it untouched. Today was not a day for chores. Today was for leaving. On the table sat a worn scrap of brown paper. She had torn it from the back of Rahima's book. Her handwriting, slow and steady, covered just 2 short lines. "May the children you seek find you. I'm going to find myself." No signature. None was needed. She placed the note on the wooden stool where Muida usually sat to lace his boots. A part of her imagined he would look at it and smile out of habit, mistaking it for a morning greeting. But there would be no greetings. Only the echo of her absence. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her without a sound. Her feet met the red dust of the path with quiet purpose. The village felt smaller than ever, and yet every step she took made it feel larger than anything she'd ever dared to dream. Near the edge of the fence, someone stirred. Little Zuri, the neighbor girl with wide eyes and a shy smile, was crouched behind a water pot, watching. She had always adored Amani, bringing her drawings made with charcoal and asking for stories when the other children mocked her stutter. Amani paused when she saw her, heart catching. Zuri didn't speak. She just stood, eyes filled with confusion and wet with the tears that children never fully understand. Amani knelt and cupped Zuri's face. "Don't be afraid of silence, my girl. Sometimes it's the only place truth can speak." Zuri nodded, her small shoulders trembling. Amani smiled, kissed her forehead and stood. She didn't say goodbye, goodbyes were too final. She simply turned and walked away as the first hint of light cracked the horizon like a thin promise. Back in the compound, Mwida stirred in his sleep. The mat beside him was cold, but he didn't notice. He rolled over, muttering something about firewood and salt. The rooster crowed once, then again. The house was oddly still when he finally rose. No pot bubbling. No broom against the floor. The usual smell of millet porridge missing. It was the silence that caught him first, not the absence of sound but the presence of something missing. He called out, irritated. "Amani." No answer. He rubbed his face, stumbled to the outer room and stopped when he saw the note. He read it once, then twice. Then again. His brow furrowed, but not with sadness. With disbelief. He stepped outside, looking down the path, expecting to see her figure just beyond the trees, maybe crouched by the well. But she was gone. And she wasn't coming back. His first instinct was to scoff. "She left," he muttered. Just like that. His voice echoed too loudly in the empty yard. Mama Darika arrived soon after, wrapped in a thick shawl and already frowning. "She's gone," Mwida said. Mama Darika clicked her tongue, not with surprise but with certainty. "Let the barren bird fly," she said. The nest was never full anyway. Mwida didn't argue, but her words hit differently than before. The house suddenly felt hollow, too wide, too exposed. He walked back inside, sat on the stool and read the note again. This time, slower. "May the children you seek find you. I'm going to find myself." The fire had gone out. He didn't light it. The water pot was empty. He didn't fetch more. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Neighbors asked where Amani had gone, but he just waved them off with a shrug. "She wasn't meant to stay," he said once. But the words left a bitter taste in his mouth. At night, the mat felt bigger, colder. The shirt she always folded now hung limply on the nail. The silence that had once been her prison was now his inheritance. He never told anyone about the note. But every now and then, he would walk by the mango tree where they had once danced and glance at the path beyond it. And though he would never say it out loud, some part of him listened, not for her footsteps but for the echo she had left behind. The town of Ndugudi welcomed Amani with the same warmth she had forgotten could exist. It wasn't loud or celebratory but steady, like the sun rising every morning without applause. The air smelled different here, not just of dust and wood smoke but of things trying to grow. Small things. Honest things. Life in Ndugudi didn't rush, it waited for those ready to begin again. Rahima had arranged a small room for her behind the village school, a mud brick structure with 3 classrooms and one shaky blackboard shared between them. Children ran barefoot with reckless joy, their clothes torn but their laughter whole. Amani watched them from her doorway, heart stitched with a quiet mix of fear and curiosity. She hadn't taught anything before, not officially. But she had been watching, listening, surviving. And somehow Rahima believed that was enough. The head teacher gave her a job helping with the younger girls, showing them how to hold a pencil, how to shape their names, how to dream without needing permission. Most came from homes full of work and silence. But one girl about 7 years old never went home at all. Her name was Nia. No last name. No mother or father. She had been left behind when her grandmother passed, and had since slept wherever someone let her. She spoke little, ate slowly, and stared at the ground as if the earth might tell her secrets the world had refused. She followed Amani around like a shadow, never asking for anything, never causing trouble. Just there. One afternoon, as Amani swept the school's dusty floor, Nia quietly began drawing in the dirt with a stick. A tree. Then a sun. Then a small woman under the branches. Amani knelt beside her. "Who is that?" she asked softly. Nia shrugged. Amani touched the figure. "She looks like someone strong." Nia glanced at her, then back at the drawing, and added a second smaller figure beside the woman. "Is that her daughter?" "No," Nia whispered, the first word she'd said all week. That's her. Amani felt something shift inside her, not like joy, but like water reaching roots it didn't know were thirsty. Days turned to weeks. Amani and Nia grew into a rhythm that felt like music. Amani began teaching Nia how to write her name. She showed her how to press seeds into soft soil, how to boil porridge without burning it. Nia started smiling. Just a little. Just enough. The schoolyard, once dry and empty, soon bore signs of new life. Amani had the idea to start a community garden, something the children could own, tend, and share. With help from Rahima and the elders, they cleared the rocky land beside the classrooms. They brought in compost, gathered seeds from neighboring farms, and formed rows with sticks and string. Amani's hands were always dirty now. She didn't mind. Each time she placed a seed into the earth, she whispered a small word. Oh, patience, Nia. She taught the children how to water gently, how to weed without yanking too hard. She taught them that growth comes quietly. That things bloom not because we beg them, but because we stay. One morning, after Nia had helped harvest spinach for the school lunch, she turned to Amani and said, "Do I have to leave when I'm older?" Amani wiped her forehead with the hem of her wrapper. "Leave where?" "From here. From you." Amani squatted down beside her, held her small hands in hers. "You were not born for me," she said, voice trembling. "But you were born for me." That evening she went to the town chief and made it official. Papers were signed with thumbprints and quiet prayers. Nia was hers now, not borrowed, not temporary. A daughter not by blood but by bond. The day Amani received the worn adoption paper, she sat by the garden with Nia in her lap. The sun was setting over the rows of maize and kale, and birds circled above like blessings with wings. "You know," Amani said, brushing Nia's hair, "I used to think I needed to have a child to be a mother. And now I know. I just needed you." Nia leaned into her, silent but sure. Amani looked around. The garden, the classroom, the faces of girls she now mentored, each one felt like a branch from a tree she thought would never grow. She wasn't trying to be someone's wife anymore. She wasn't trying to prove her worth. She was simply planting, feeding, teaching, living. And for the first time in her life she felt like a mother. Not because she had carried anyone in her womb, but because she had carried them through. The skies over Kasenga forgot how to weep. 4 months, the sun had scorched the earth with no mercy, turning green into gray and promise into dust. The fields that once danced with maize and cassava now lay cracked and barren, their furrows split like tired palms begging for rain. Muida's land, once envied by neighbors, looked no different than the road beside it. Dry, empty, broken. He stood one morning at the edge of the field, hands on his hips, staring at the brittle stalks that had once been his pride. There was no breeze. No birds. Not even flies buzzed anymore. Just silence. The kind that fills your ears when you finally run out of excuses. He kicked a stone and cursed. Then kicked another, harder, as if the land had betrayed him. But the truth lay heavier than the heat. It wasn't the land that had failed. It was everything else. After Amani left, Muida had remarried within a year. His mother had chosen the new wife, Jamila, a younger woman with soft hands and big eyes. She came with her own expectations. A strong husband, full fields, plenty of food. For the first few months things had gone well. She bore him a child, a boy just like Mama Darika had always wanted. But when the rain stopped and the savings dried, so did Jamila's patience. The child grew thin. The milk ran out. The cries became endless. Muida, unable to provide, began selling tools, then livestock. 1 goat. Then 2 chickens. Then the bicycle. He stopped going to the bar. Not out of change but out of shame. The same friends who once laughed at his jokes now laughed behind his back. "You remember when he called his first wife a roofless house?" Someone muttered one evening. "Now his own roof is leaking hunger." Jamila said nothing at first. She boiled what she could, slept when the baby did, and looked out the door more often than she looked at Muida. One morning, after a long argument about fetching water, she packed her things into a borrowed sack, tied her child to her back, and left. No tears. No words. She left the way Amani had, quiet but final. Muida sat on the edge of the empty bed for hours that day, the baby's blanket still holding the shape of his small body. The silence in the house now felt loud. Deafening. He walked outside, hoping someone would call his name, ask if he was all right, offer food or words or even mockery. But no one did. Mama Darika, now growing frail, shook her head when he came to her. "You wanted harvest without planting truth," she said. "The land doesn't forget how you treat those who watered it." Muida, desperate, humbled, walked barefoot to the chief's hut 2 days later. The chief, a man of few words and many wrinkles, sat in the shade with his pipe resting against his thigh. He looked up as Mwita approached, noticing how the once proud man no longer walked with his chest out. Mwita knelt. Not in custom. "Need. I have nothing," he said. "No food, no family, no seed to start again. Help me." The chief didn't answer right away. He picked up his pipe, tapped it gently against the wood. "You once laughed loudly, Mwita," the old man said. "Do you remember what you laughed at?" Mwita stared at the ground. "At a woman," the chief continued, "who couldn't bear you a child. At her silence. At her pain. And yet, here you are, with an empty house and a full belly of regret." "I didn't know," Mwita whispered. "No," the chief said, voice low and firm. "You didn't listen." He stood slowly, his knees cracking beneath him, and walked over to a sack of dried beans he had set aside for emergencies. "You can have these," he said, handing it over. "Enough to feed you for a few days. But remember this, Mwita, fertile soil doesn't laugh at the cracked one. It just grows what it can." Mwita held the sack in trembling hands, ashamed but too hungry to refuse. He bowed his head, muttered a thank you, and walked away. As he passed the fields on his way home, he saw the children of other farmers helping their parents weed the small patches that had survived. Their voices were soft, their movements deliberate. None of them looked his way. None of them waved. That night, Mwita boiled half the beans over a low fire and ate in silence. There was no wife to scold him for eating too fast. No child to cry beside him. No one to notice whether he finished the pot or let it burn. Just a man. Alone. In a house that once overflowed with laughter, now echoing with the sound of falling pride. The journey to Ndugudi began not with hope, but with hunger. Mwita had not eaten properly in 3 days. The last handful of beans had been boiled with more water than food, stretched into a tasteless broth that didn't even quiet his stomach. His mother was now bedridden, and the neighbors no longer bothered to greet him. His land remained dead. His name, once spoken with admiration, now carried dust. He had heard whispers from a passing traveler, of a woman running a food garden in Ndugudi, teaching village girls and feeding the hungry. The traveler had spoken without knowing the name would sting. "Amani," he had said. "She's doing something real there. She's grown full in the face, strong not just in body but in spirit. They say people come from neighboring villages just to eat from her garden." Mwita hadn't asked questions. He had simply risen the next morning, wrapped a cloth around his shoulder, and started walking. The 10-mile stretch between Kasenga and Ndugudi had never felt so long. The sun was unforgiving. His feet blistered quickly, and he had no gourd, no sandals, just dry resolve and the shame that followed behind like a shadow. He passed one hill, then another, each steeper than the last. His body grew weaker, but he told himself, just one more mile. Just one more turn. There was no pride left to protect. Just a hollow in his belly and a faint image of the woman he had once dismissed, now becoming his only light. By the time the village signs came into view, Mwita could barely keep his eyes open. He followed the sound of children laughing and women singing. It was a food-sharing day. Tables had been laid with sweet potatoes, cassava stew, boiled greens. Smoke curled into the air like music. He stumbled into the garden's edge, where the scent of soil and harvest wrapped around him like a blanket. His eyes landed on a tree, the oldest in the compound, its branches stretching wide like open arms. He staggered toward it, legs buckling under him, and collapsed. A small pair of feet ran toward him, followed by more. But one child knelt beside him first, holding a gourd of water to his lips before even asking his name. "Here," the girl whispered. "Drink slowly." Mwita coughed, then sipped. The cool water shocked his throat, but he drank until his shaking hands steadied. He opened his eyes to see the girl more clearly, big, bright eyes, a calm steadiness beyond her years. "Who are you?" he rasped. "I'm Nia," she said, wiping his forehead with a cloth. "My mama always says, no one leaves our gate hungry." Mwita stared at her. Nia. The name tasted like something he hadn't earned. He didn't need to ask who her mother was. It was written in the girl's grace, in her patience, in the way her hands comforted rather than questioned. Amani came a few moments later, drawn by the commotion. She moved with calm authority, wearing a kitenge skirt and a head wrap that framed her face like sunlight frames a flower. She stopped when she saw him, bent, frail, seated beneath the tree he had once compared her to, roofless. Their eyes met. Mwita tried to rise, but Amani shook her head. "Rest," she said softly. He opened his mouth to speak but found no words worthy of the moment. Not even sorry felt right. Nia looked up at her. Mama, he's hungry. Amani nodded. Then feed him. A plate was brought, cassava, groundnuts, roasted eggplant. Nia helped him eat, spoon by spoon, her small hands steady. Not once did she ask why he had come. Not once did she pull back. Mwida swallowed slowly. You've done all this? Amani sat down across from him, legs folded beneath her. Not alone, she said. But yes. We planted. We waited. We didn't give up. He looked around at the other children laughing, the women moving between tables, the strong green rows of food planted with care. His stomach was full, but his soul ached with the weight of understanding. I have nothing, he whispered. Amani looked at him, her face unreadable. You once had everything, she replied. But you couldn't see it. He lowered his head. Now, she added, you're welcome to eat. But don't ask me for yesterday. I gave it to the soil. Mwida nodded. There was no argument left in him. No defense. Just a strange sense of relief that she had become what he never saw in her. A builder, a nurturer, a home. That day he stayed under the tree until evening, sipping more water, watching Nia play with the other children. Once she ran past him and smiled. And Mwida, a man who once laughed at empty arms, was fed by the child who came from none of his, but all of hers. The garden was quieter now. Most of the visitors from the food-sharing day had left, their laughter fading into the dusk. Smoke curled gently from the cook fires. Birds rustled in the branches above, and the scent of boiled pumpkin leaves lingered in the air. Mwida sat beneath the same tree, still weak, still uncertain if this place would allow him to exist without judgment. His stomach no longer ached, but something deeper inside did, something that food couldn't soothe. He watched as Amani walked toward him again, her steps unhurried, her face calm but unreadable. She sat on the bench beside him, folding her wrapper beneath her knees. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Mwida cleared his throat, his voice cracked but deliberate. Amani, I don't know what to say. You've already said enough in other years, she replied without cruelty, without warmth. He nodded. The silence pressed against his chest, heavier than shame. I laughed at you. I mocked you. I said things I thought made me strong. His voice shook. But today your child fed me. She gave me water. She looked at me like I mattered. Amani looked at him, not coldly, not kindly, simply honestly. You were never starved of food, Mwida, she said. You were starved of understanding. That can be harder to heal. He dropped his head. I thought, he hesitated, trying to find the words. I thought a wife was for giving children. I thought love was loud and pride was purpose. And now, she asked quietly. He looked up at her, eyes brimming. Now I know pride has teeth. And I fed it until it bit me. Amani exhaled slowly, her gaze steady. I didn't come here to build revenge, she said. I came here to rebuild myself. She turned toward the garden, where Nia sat playing with stones, humming softly to herself. The tune was familiar, an old lullaby. One Amani had sung to herself in the darkness of those years when no one came to hold her hand or speak her name gently. She's kind, Mwida said, watching the child. She reminds me of you. She reminds me of who I needed to become, Amani replied. I didn't get seeds, Mwida. Life gave me only soil and time. So I planted food instead of regret. He sat still, ashamed, waiting for a curse or a blessing or perhaps just dismissal. But Amani didn't offer any of those. You may stay here tonight, she said after a while. We have an extra mat inside. You'll rest. Eat a bit more. His face softened, overwhelmed. Thank you, he said, voice cracking. She nodded, standing to leave. But understand, this isn't a return. He looked up. You are not coming back to what was, she continued. You are just resting. That is all. He blinked slowly, taking in her words. They were not cruel, but they were final. Amani turned to walk away, then paused and added, You asked for rain from a sky you had spit into for years. Don't confuse shelter with forgiveness. She disappeared behind the garden fence, leaving him with only the rustle of the trees and the rhythm of a child's hum. Nia walked past him moments later, gathering her pebbles into a cloth bag. She looked up and smiled faintly. Would you like water for the night? She asked. He nodded. She ran off, bare feet kicking up dust, that same lullaby still humming from her lips. And Mwida, once the man who mocked silence, now sat still, listening to a tune he never taught, being served by a child he never fathered, under the tree of a woman he never truly knew. Grace, he realized, was not softness. It was strength grown patiently in the places he once scorched. Before the rooster could crow, Before even the first light of dawn reached across Ndigudi's garden paths, Mwita was already awake. He sat under the old tree, blanket wrapped around his shoulders, the mat folded neatly beside him. The night had been sleepless but not restless. For the first time in years his mind had been still. He had not dreamed of land or harvest or legacy. He had only thought of hands, Amani's hands, planting, feeding, raising what the world had once denied her. The stars were fading when he placed the folded piece of paper on the low stool near the garden shed. The paper was creased, his handwriting clumsy, but the words had been carved from his insides. There were no flowers in the sentences. Just roots. Truthful ones. He stood slowly, his legs aching, and looked once more toward the house. No one stirred. A chicken scratched softly in the shadows. Somewhere inside, Nia was probably curled beneath a kitenge, her fingers wrapped around a dream. Amani would be on her feet soon, stoking the fire, preparing breakfast not just for her daughter but for the village girls who now called her Mama. Mwita didn't knock. He didn't wait for thanks or permission. He simply turned and walked back the way he had come, toward Kasenga, toward the village that had once praised his pride, toward the dust he had shaped with his laughter and ruined with his silence. By the time Amani came to the garden that morning, he was long gone. She found the letter by accident when reaching for a bowl of seeds. She paused before unfolding it. There was no fear, only quiet curiosity. You were the garden. I only saw the fruit. I never knew the hands that watered the world. Mwita. She held the paper for a moment longer, not blinking, not speaking. Then she folded it back and placed it in the tin box where Nia's first drawings and her adoption paper were kept. She didn't smile, didn't weep. The truth needed neither. It had arrived. And now it could rest. Back in Kasenga, Mwita's return raised more eyebrows than greetings. People whispered. Some mocked. But he no longer cared. He moved differently now, not like someone seeking status but like someone seeking soil. He rebuilt his mother's hut, not with hired hands but his own. He joined the youth in fetching water, carrying bundles of firewood on his back. He didn't preach. He listened. When a young widower lost his wife to illness and was left with 2 crying children, Mwita showed up with food. No explanation. Just presence. Soon people began to notice the change. Not loudly. Quietly. Like how drought ends, not with thunder, but with dew. He organized a communal compost pit. Helped elderly men till land they'd given up on. Offered to fix broken roofing with the teens who had once laughed at him behind his back. He spoke rarely of Amani. When he did, he said only this. She gave more from nothing than I ever did with everything. Meanwhile, Ndugudi bloomed in a way even Amani hadn't imagined. The food-sharing days became weekly. Girls who had once dropped out of school returned to learn under Amani's shade. Young mothers sat under the mango trees while Rahima taught them how to write their names, and Nia taught the children how to plant onions in even rows. They named it Shul Yamama, Mother's School. Not because it was for mothers alone but because it was born of mothering. Not the kind that begins with birth, but the kind that begins with choosing to feed, protect, guide and raise others, even when no one ever did the same for you. One afternoon Nia asked her, "Why do we let boys come too?" Amani smiled, hands deep in the earth. Because one day one of them might become the kind of man we needed. At the edge of the school's small notice board, Rahima posted letters of thanks from women who had moved to new towns, opened farms, started small bakeries. One letter came from a teenage girl who wrote, "I used to hate my voice. Now I teach my little sister how to sing." Life flowed in and out of Shul Yamama like a river with no end. And Amani, no longer the woman who was once whispered about as barren, now stood as a pillar others leaned on. She rarely spoke of the past. But sometimes, when she sat under the tree where Mwita had rested, she would hum the lullaby that once held her together in the silence. Nia would run past, laughing, dancing, free. And Amani would whisper to the soil beneath her hands, "We grew. We really did. No more fruitless waiting. No more begging for love that required proof. Just planting. Just feeding. Just becoming." The morning of the festival of seeds rose with laughter tucked into the wind. The air in Ndugudi smelled of roasted maize, wet soil and something even richer, gratitude. Colorful fabric swayed between trees like prayer flags. Children's footprints trailed around the garden beds, their excited voices practicing songs and lines for the stage that had been built from repurposed school benches and banana leaves. It had been 3 years since Amani first placed a seed into this ground. Now vegetables grew taller than some of the children, and the once bare courtyard pulsed with life. What began as survival had grown into celebration. Amani stood near the garden gate, adjusting the head wrap on Nia's head. Nia looked taller today, not just in height but in presence. She wore a simple dress, yellow like the sun, with tiny stitched leaves across the hem, a design she'd made herself with scraps of cloth donated from mothers in town. "Are you nervous?" Amani asked gently. Nia grinned. "Only a little. But I wrote every word from my heart. So if I forget one, my heart will remember." Amani smiled, cupping her cheek. "Then that's enough." Rahima appeared behind them, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and holding a basket of guavas. "Don't let her fool you," she said, winking. "She practiced that poem in front of the chickens 5 times this morning." Everyone laughed. By mid-morning the entire town had gathered. Mats were spread under the mango trees. Mothers bounced babies on their laps, and fathers leaned forward with quiet pride. Elders sat in a shaded circle near the center. Even the town chief arrived, his walking stick decorated with dried flowers and sweet-smelling herbs. The festival began with music. Drums and flutes, voices in harmony. Then came the play performed by the village children, titled, "The Woman Who Fed Us All." They had written it themselves, with Rahima's help of course, and it told the story of a woman who had nothing but her hands and her hope. She planted where others had walked past. She taught children to read the sky and the soil. And when hunger came, she fed the world not just with food but with love. Amani watched from the second row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes followed each child, each moment, and when the girl playing the woman knelt beside a hungry stranger and offered him a leaf-wrapped meal, her breath caught. They weren't just acting. They were remembering. Then came Nia's moment. She stepped forward onto the small stage, holding a scroll she had rolled carefully the night before. The crowd hushed. Her voice, small but sure, rose into the sunlit air. "You did not give me birth, but you gave me a world. A world of hands that teach, of soil that forgives, of lullabies sung to no one, that found someone. You gave me roots so I could grow. You gave me light so I could see. You gave me food, but more than that, you gave me a name. That means home." There was silence. Then a swell of applause. Rahima gently touched Amani's arm. "See what grew from silence?" Amani couldn't speak. Her tears came quietly, freely. She stood and embraced Nia tightly as the girl stepped down. They held each other in front of everyone, not needing to explain what had passed between them, because it was already known. Afterward, the festival continued with dancing and feasting. Bowls of groundnut stew, grilled tilapia, mango slices and plantains filled the long shared tables. Children handed out vegetables they had harvested that morning. Amani gave a short speech about the future plans for Shul Yamama, including a small library, a water tank and a plot expansion for more herbs. But something else was happening too. Quietly. In the background. Muida stood beneath the shade of a tall neem tree far from the stage, dressed simply in a clean but faded shirt. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. He had walked again, slowly this time, not as a man returning for redemption, but as one bearing witness. He watched the play. He heard Nia's poem. And when the applause filled the air, he found himself clapping, slowly then fully, until his palms ached and his eyes blurred. He didn't approach Amani. Didn't need to. It was enough to see. Enough to know that from the woman he once broke, a world had bloomed. That evening, as the sun melted into gold across the fields, Amani and Nia stood in the garden, bare feet in the soil. Nia pressed a new seed into the earth. "What should we call this one?" she asked. Amani smiled. "Let's call it tomorrow." And as the wind moved softly through the leaves, the world seemed to agree. We are not only mothers through blood, but through the hands we stretch, the mouths we feed, the soil we tend. Some wombs grow silent, but hearts keep speaking, planting tenderness in the places where grief once slept. Amani lost something precious. But what she gave, her time, her care, her grace, grew taller than any tree in her past. She did not curse the emptiness, she filled it. With gardens. With songs. With a girl who once had no name and now stood before a village as a living poem. And when the man who laughed at her returned, skin clinging to regret, it was not her anger that greeted him, it was her harvest. Her food. Her child. A home built not with forgiveness but with quiet purpose. The child he once mocked into impossibility became the one who reminded him of his own humanity. And in that moment the circle didn't close, it bloomed. Because true legacy is not found in revenge or perfection. It's found in the soft persistence of love, the resilience of quiet women, and the hands that keep planting even when the world forgets to rain. What grows from that feeds everyone. Even those who once walked away.